Slumps used to be such a part of my life, and I'm not talking like a chill little cute slump. I mean just like stretches of time where I felt paralyzed, low. There would usually be a lot of Netflix, a lot of scrolling, bed rotting, and these slumps could go on. And don't get me wrong, I did the most to try and manage these. Like I was up in the Mel Robbins, the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 trick. I used my bounce back checklist, which I still love. And a lot of these things that I tried would help. Some of them wouldn't, but nothing ever really changed the pattern of slumping. In this podcast episode, I really want to talk about what I started doing differently. Funks and slumps, they just aren't a big part of my life so much anymore. I get lows, but they pass pretty quickly and I know how to manage them. And they just don't impact me as much as they used to. I want to give you kind of a step-by-step, but also a concept that really helped. Welcome to Grow With Intention, the podcast for people who want to create a life that feels good. Before I talk directly about how I exited my slump era, I have to talk in depth about the concept that changed things for me. This concept, honestly, it's gonna sound weird, and I could just imagine some people listening to this and being like, what are you actually talking about? But I'm hoping that some people will listen to this and it'll impact them in the way that it did me, because it truly is one of the only ideas that has ever helped me with this, that has helped to not just put a band-aid on slumping or managing my emotions, but has helped me to change the pattern long term. So if you have listened to this podcast before, you might have heard me use the analogy of your brain as an algorithm. It is always spitting out thoughts and feelings for us to experience, kind of like our TikTok For You page. So TikTok's job is to serve you fresh, new content. In the same way, your brain's job is to send you fresh, new content. You don't really create the content that your brain comes up with. It's almost like its own little creative mechanism. You don't sit there and go, how do I want to feel about this? What should I think right now? Those thoughts and feelings just pop up, a lot like your TikTok For You page. And something that is true about the TikTok For You page is that there is always fresh content around the corner. It never runs out of fresh content. And you only really stop that fresh content from flowing when you get stuck on a video that's on your For You page. You fixate on something that appears. In the same way, there is always fresh content ready for your mind. Thoughts are always flowing through you. You're always only one thought or one feeling away from a whole new experience. You only stop the flow of thoughts and feelings when you get fixated on something that's already appeared. I am going to link this back to slumps, but this idea in itself is just something that really shifted things for me. Because once you start to notice it playing out, you just can't unsee it. Even though it sounds simple, it has been life-changing for me. If you've ever sat down and you have meditated for like 10 minutes, you don't even have to be a proper meditator, don't worry, but you would have noticed how quickly your thoughts and your feelings are replaced by new thoughts and feelings. When you don't get caught up in anything that arises and you just sort of let everything pass. It's almost astonishing when you really pay attention to it, how quickly thoughts and feelings can flow through you when you are able to just move your attention back to the breath whenever you get distracted by them. And really, by moving your attention back to the breath, what that's saying is, hey, you've gotten fixated on something, let go of your attachment to that thing, untangle yourself because you're messing with the flow. As soon as you do that, you will find that thoughts and feelings will start flowing through you naturally again. So coming back to funks, which is the whole point of this video, when I started seeing my thoughts and feelings from that perspective, as like this ever-flowing river that simply does not stop unless you get tangled up in something that appears. It gave me this knowledge that I am always one thought or one feeling away from a new experience. And because of that idea, I started reacting in a really different way to my funks when they would come up. So usually when I would hit these low points or these slumps, I would have been served some kind of negative thoughts and feelings by my brain's little For You page. And before I understood this concept, I would completely stop the flow of thought because I would get fixated on whatever had just appeared in my head. I would grab onto those thoughts and feelings, which would stop the flow of fresh thought. When you grab onto your thoughts and feelings, it's usually very self-focused. So it's, what does this thought or feeling mean about me? For me, I would often get a sense of like, well, why am I feeling this way? Does this mean something? Is my life not good that I'm feeling this way? Is something wrong with me for feeling this? I shouldn't feel this way. You go down this whole useless spiral. For me, I wouldn't consciously think those words. I don't really think in clear sentences, but it would just be a sense, a general vibe of, I don't like this, I don't want it, resistance, I shouldn't, what does this mean, etc. And if I've learned anything in this life, it's that if you react to any feeling with that big of a response, you are going to get stuck in it and you are going to stop the flow of thoughts. But now I see things in a bit of a different way and I trust that new thought is always going to be flowing in. So if I notice a low thought or feeling, I'm not the messiah. Like, yes, sometimes I get caught up in them and it might take me a second, but eventually I'll just be like, okay, that's happening. I'm going to step out of that, get back into the world a little. And then I sort of follow the mantra of metacognitive therapy, which is I do everything I can to do nothing with my thoughts and feelings. I just let myself experience them, which doesn't take any active participation from me, by the way. Feelings get felt so long as they're not suppressed. And my goal is just to not pay them too much mind. I kind of just like float my way through life. And if thoughts and feelings appear, I'm just like, okay, I'm letting them pass because fresh thought will come. I know from experience and from observing it so many times in myself that my mind will self-correct. It always does. And I will feel completely differently about something when I'm in a good mood versus in a bad mood. For example, in a good mood, when I look at my YouTube channel, I'm like, God, it looks so cute. The vibes are up, branding's looking great. I'm feeling good about my content. In a bad mood, I'll be like, damn, views are down. I'm in my flop era. Things are bad. I can view something just so differently based on my mood. And because I'm so aware of that fact, it's a lot easier to actually disregard my thoughts and feelings. I only became aware of that though by observing. So that's kind of a step in this process too. But what I've learned from dealing with lows is that it's truly better if I'm hands off. My mind will always self-correct without too much intervention from me. Sometimes I will say to myself things like, okay, fresh thought's gonna come soon, babe. We're good. Or my brain's having a moment, no need to pay too much attention to it. It's gonna do its own thing. It'll figure it out. I trust that it knows what it's doing. This is literally what it's made for. And I almost just have this expectation like new thoughts and feelings are going to flow in eventually, so long as I don't stop the flow. And inevitably they do. The immediate thoughts and feelings that will flow in aren't always super helpful. But eventually, if you just keep on letting new thoughts flow, they seem to just trend helpful or neutral on their own. A completely unfounded idea that I have is that our mind just knows when it needs to self-correct. So it eventually just starts sending more helpful thoughts. Self-aware enough to recognize that what I'm sharing is a little bit different to my usual content. I have always been such a practical, actionable, and what's the steps that I need to take kind of gal. And this is almost the opposite of that because it's just kind of like a way of looking at things, but it's also a way of looking at things that has been the only thing that has really helped change this pattern. Rather than just like popping a little band-aid on, making it better for a little while, it's helped to shift the way that I approach these funks and slumps completely. And reliably, just because of this idea, if I get low feelings or whatever, they're just shorter. They don't really impact my life. Like they're not a big deal anymore. I am a human being. I still have days where I get caught up in thought, where I block the flow of my thoughts, if you want to put it that way. But what used to be like a real consistent problem for me, it just isn't anymore. If you want to make this a little bit more actionable after this podcast episode, I would recommend just sitting down and closing your eyes and doing a little meditation session. This is not me recommending like a regular meditation practice, but simply just observe how quickly your thoughts pass when you can detach yourself from each thought rather than follow it. Pay attention to how quickly one thought gets replaced with the next because it is so much quicker than you probably realize. You might just be blocking the flow a bit more than you want to be. Once again, this is not about meditating. This is just about having the realization that like you are one thought or feeling away from an entirely new experience. Thoughts are constantly flowing. You cannot really stop them. That's just how your brain works. It's like the TikTok For You page. For me, once this realization sunk in, it was just really hard to unsee. And it's affected not just this area of my life, but other areas of my life as well. At the end of every podcast episode, I do a little Rex of the week where I recommend resources that you can dive into if you particularly enjoyed this podcast episode. My recommendation would be Just a Thought by Amy Johnson as like a nice place to start. Usually I'm someone to recommend things that are really actionable. It's less so. It's going to be more concept-y, kind of like this podcast episode. But it might hit in a way that this podcast episode doesn't. And my very last recommendation, the thing that you should watch after this, is my podcast episode on metacognitive therapy. So if you listen to this and you're like, I kind of get it, I want to get it a bit more, metacognitive therapy might vibe with you more, especially if you're a more practical person. Metacognitive therapy, while it's not as known of a therapy, it is very evidence-based. Like there has been a ton of research done on it. It's really nothing woo-woo. If you give it a Google, it's earned its chops. So you might resonate with listening to that podcast episode a little bit more. And even having the perspective of this podcast episode, listening to that episode might feel a little different. I'll have that podcast episode linked down in the show notes or in the description if you're on YouTube. I appreciate you so much and I will see you soon.